The dust devils spun across the Oklahoma plains like a prayer made visible, and that's when Marcus first saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the reservation cemetery, fingers tracing the weathered headstones as if reading Braille messages from the dead. Marcus had returned home to the Comanche Nation after 15 years away, his fancy law degree from Harvard feeling like a costume he couldn't take off. He'd left as a boy running from the whispers that followed him, Omega, weak, too soft for this world, and returned as a man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what sunlight felt like on his real skin. The stranger at the cemetery turned, and Marcus's breath caught. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, long black hair whipping in the wind, eyes like obsidian holding depths of sorrow that seemed ancient. But it was the way he stood that struck Marcus most, utterly alone, yet somehow complete, like a tree that had learned to grow despite the drought. "You're Marcus Lone Wolf," the stranger said, not a question but a recognition. "Your grandmother was Singing Bird. She used to leave water and cornmeal at my family's graves." Marcus stepped closer, his expensive shoes already dust-covered and ruined. The leather that had cost him a week's salary in Boston seemed ridiculous now, pretentious even, against the red Oklahoma earth that remembered his footsteps from childhood. "How did you know her?" "I'm Kai," he said simply. "I'm the last one. The last of the Red Eagle line." His voice carried the weight of extinction, of being the final chapter in a book no one else would remember. "And I heard you help people now, with your law degree. I heard you defend those who can't defend themselves." Something in Marcus's chest cracked open, that place he'd sealed shut the day he'd left, the day he'd decided that hiding who he was mattered more than being who he was. He remembered his grandmother's funeral notice arriving in Boston, remembered staring at it for 3 days before finally booking the flight home. He'd told his colleagues it was just a quick trip to settle an estate. He hadn't told them he was terrified of coming back, of facing everything he'd run from. "What do you need?" Marcus asked, and Kai smiled, sad and knowing. "Not for me. Never for me. But there's a family, the Johnsons, about to lose their land. The land where the sacred springs run, where our people have held ceremonies for 10 generations. Some corporation wants to drill, and they've got lawyers and money and everything we don't have." Kai's hands trembled slightly, and Marcus noticed the calluses, the evidence of hard work that his own hands had lost years ago. "I thought, maybe someone who left and came back might remember why the leaving hurt so much. Might fight for what matters." Marcus should have said no. He'd come home to settle his grandmother's estate, sell the house with its creaking floors and memories in every corner, and return to Boston where he'd built a life of impressive emptiness. His apartment there had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, designer furniture, and not a single photograph on the walls. He'd dated appropriate people, other lawyers, bankers, people who understood ambition. But he'd never let anyone close enough to see the truth of who he was. But standing there, with the wind carrying the scent of sage and rain that might never come, with this stranger who looked at him like he could see through every carefully constructed lie, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like himself. Like that boy who used to run barefoot through these same fields, who knew every bird's song and every plant's medicine, who'd been called weak for crying at beautiful sunsets and for caring too much about everyone's feelings. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, and Kai's face transformed, hope blooming like a wildflower in impossible soil. They walked together through the cemetery, Kai stopping at nearly every grave to share a story. "This is my great-grandmother, Morning Star. She could predict weather patterns 3 months in advance, saved the tribe during the drought of 1953. Another grave, my uncle, Thomas Red Eagle. He was the last fluent speaker of our dialect. Died trying to teach it to anyone who would listen." With each story, Marcus felt the weight of what Kai carried, not just grief, but responsibility. The responsibility of being the last, of holding all those memories with no one to pass them to. "Do you have anyone?" Marcus asked quietly. "Family, friends, someone who..." Kai shook his head. "My parents died when I was 12, car accident on Highway 62. My grandmother raised me until she passed 3 years ago. As for friends. He paused, looking out over the plains. People are kind, but they have their own families, their own struggles. And I'm different. You know how it is. Marcus did know. Omegas in their community were supposed to be protected, cherished, but the reality was more complicated. They were seen as fragile, needing constant supervision, or they were fetishized, reduced to biology and stereotypes. Marcus had spent his entire adult life suppressing his nature, taking medications to hide his scent, avoiding situations where his true designation might be discovered. The corporation is called Titan Energy, Kai continued, pulling a worn folder from his bag. They've been buying up land around the reservation for 2 years. Most people sold, the money was good, and times are hard. But the Johnson family refused. That land has the last remaining sacred springs, and if we lose it. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Marcus took the folder, flipping through documents, contracts, legal notices. His lawyer brain immediately started cataloging the problems. The family had limited resources, the corporation had already secured most of the necessary permits, and the timeline for appeals was nearly expired. It was a case most lawyers would refuse because winning seemed impossible. This won't be easy, Marcus said. They've been very thorough. Very aggressive. I know, Kai said. That's why I needed someone who understands what it means to fight when you're supposed to be weak. Someone who knows that sometimes the impossible is just something no one's been brave enough to try yet. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His grandmother used to say something similar, the impossible is just the thing we do after we stop being afraid. She'd said it to him the night before he left for college, when he confessed his fears about being an Omega in a world that didn't value softness, empathy, or emotional intelligence. I'll look at the case, Marcus heard himself say. No promises, but I'll look. Kai's smile was like sunrise, slow, warm, and transformative. That's all I ask. Come to my house tomorrow. I've been collecting everything I could find, historical documents, environmental studies, testimonies from elders. It's not organized, but it's a start. They exchanged numbers, and as Marcus walked back to his grandmother's house, he felt something shifting inside him. The walls he'd built so carefully were developing cracks, and instead of terrifying him, it felt like relief. Like finally being able to breathe deeply after years of shallow breaths. That night, Marcus sat on his grandmother's porch, the same porch where she'd taught him to identify constellations and told him stories about their ancestors. The house was supposed to go on the market next week. He'd already contacted a real estate agent, already started sorting through belongings with the cold efficiency he'd perfected in his professional life. But now, holding Kai's folder, smelling the familiar scent of sage that his grandmother had always kept burning, Marcus wondered if he'd been running towards something all these years or away from everything that mattered. His phone buzzed, a message from his boss in Boston asking when he'd be back, reminding him of the important merger case that needed his attention. Marcus looked out at the plains, at the land that held the bones of his ancestors and the memories of who he used to be. And for the first time in 15 years, he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he opened Kai's folder and began to read, and with each page, he felt himself coming home, not just to a place, but to himself. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, late-night research sessions, and strategy meetings held in Kai's tiny house that smelled like cedar and coffee. Marcus discovered that Kai worked 3 jobs, gas station clerk from midnight to 6 in the morning, caregiver for elders during the day, and cultural teacher at the tribal school 3 evenings a week, and still found time to organize community events, deliver groceries to those who couldn't drive, and somehow keep hope alive in a place where hope was an act of defiance. Why do you do this? Marcus asked one night, surrounded by legal briefs and empty takeout containers. It was past 2 in the morning, and they'd been working for 16 hours straight, trying to find a legal precedent that might save the sacred springs. You give everything to everyone. What do you keep for yourself? Kai looked up from the map he'd been studying, marking every sacred site that would be destroyed if the drilling went forward. The lamplight caught the exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else, a fierce, unbreakable joy that Marcus couldn't understand. How could someone who had so little, who'd lost so much, still radiate that kind of hope? My grandmother told me something before she died, Kai said softly, setting down his pen. She said that Omegas in our tribe were never considered weak. We were the ones who held communities together, who remembered the songs, who loved so fiercely that even the earth felt it. She said our power wasn't in dominating, it was in connecting, in seeing the threads that bind us all. He paused, fingers still on the map, tracing invisible lines between the sacred sites. When I give, I'm not losing anything. I'm weaving the world I want to live in. Marcus felt tears he'd forbidden for 15 years burning behind his eyes. I spent so long trying to be someone else. Someone harder, colder, more alpha. I thought that's what success looked like. His voice cracked. I made partner at my firm last year. Youngest in the company's history. I have money, prestige, everything I thought I wanted. And I wake up every morning feeling like I'm suffocating. Kai moved around the table, settling beside Marcus on the worn couch that probably predated both of them. Tell me, he said simply, and those two words were an invitation Marcus had been waiting his whole adult life to receive. So Marcus told him everything. About the suppressants he took to hide his scent, the lies he told about his designation, the constant vigilance required to maintain his carefully constructed persona. He told Kai about the alpha colleague who discovered his secret last year and used it to try to control him, threatening exposure if Marcus didn't throw a case. About how Marcus had won the case anyway but had started therapy for the first time, started questioning whether the life he'd built was worth the cost. And now I'm here, Marcus finished, supposed to be selling my grandmother's house and going back to that life, but instead I'm fighting a case I'll probably lose, spending time with someone who sees right through me, and I don't know if I'm brave enough for any of it. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Kai said quietly. It's doing the thing that terrifies you because it matters more than your fear. He reached out, hesitating just before touching Marcus's hand. May I? Marcus nodded, and Kai's fingers intertwined with his. The touch was electric, not in the dramatic, overwhelming way romance novels described, but in something deeper. A recognition. A coming home. I see you, Marcus Lone Wolf, Kai whispered. Not the lawyer, not the alpha you pretend to be, not the boy who ran away. I see the man who came back. The one who's been reading late into the night, not just about this case but about our history, our language, our ceremonies. I see someone who's been pretending to be lost but who's actually been finding his way home all along. Marcus's defenses, 15 years of carefully constructed walls, crumbled. He turned to Kai, this man who gave everything and asked for nothing, who worked himself to exhaustion for a community that would never fully appreciate his sacrifices, who carried the weight of being the last of his line with such grace it made Marcus's heart ache. And are you happy? Kai asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation all at once. Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang, shattering the moment. It was the tribal council chairman. The hearing was moved up, they had 48 hours instead of 2 weeks. The corporation was pushing through, using political pressure and money to fast-track the approval. It should have been impossible to prepare a winning case in that time. We can't do this, Marcus said, panic rising. We need more time, more evidence, more. Kai stood up and walked to Marcus, close enough that Marcus could see flecks of gold in those dark eyes, could smell sage and something uniquely Kai, home and wildness mixed together. Could feel the heat of him, the solidity, the absolute certainty that seemed to radiate from his core. Let me touch your lips, Kai whispered, and Marcus froze, caught between terror and longing. Not as a kiss, but as a blessing. My grandmother taught me that when we share breath with someone, we share spirits. We become stronger together than we ever could apart. Kai's fingers were gentle on Marcus's jaw, tilting his face up. Marcus could feel his own heart pounding, could feel every defense mechanism he'd ever developed screaming at him to pull away, to protect himself, to not let anyone this close. "Make me yours forever," Kai continued, and his voice held no demand, only offering. "Not in ownership but in partnership. Fight with me. Not for me, not despite me, but with me. Let me be the strength you forgot you had. Let me remind you that softness is not weakness, that caring is not failure, that loving fiercely enough to be broken by loss is the only way to truly live." Their lips met, feather soft, and Marcus felt something unlock inside him. 15 years of running, stopping. 15 years of hiding, ending. 15 years of pretending, transforming into something real and terrifying and absolutely necessary. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying, but neither looked away. "Forever?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Forever," Kai confirmed. "However long we have, whatever comes next. Together." They worked through the night, but something had changed. Marcus wasn't just preparing a legal case anymore, he was fighting for something that mattered. Kai made phone calls, pulling in every favor, reaching out to everyone who owed him anything. And people responded. The community that Marcus had thought barely noticed Kai's sacrifices showed up in force. Elders arrived with oral histories. The cultural center director brought historical documents. Environmental scientists who'd been documenting the springs for decades offered expert testimony. Even people who'd sold their own land to Titan Energy came forward, admitting they'd been pressured, that the promises made to them had been broken. By the time dawn broke, Marcus and Kai had something that looked almost like a fighting chance. It still wasn't enough, not by conventional legal standards, but it was something. It was hope, and sometimes hope was the most powerful weapon of all. Marcus looked at Kai, seeing the exhaustion on his face but also the determination, and understood something fundamental: strength came in many forms. The strength to endure, yes, but also the strength to care despite knowing you might lose. The strength to keep giving when you had nothing left. The strength to believe in impossible things and fight for them anyway. "Thank you," Marcus said, and the words carried the weight of everything he couldn't yet articulate. Kai smiled, tired but radiant. "Thank yourself. You're the one who chose to stay, to fight, to stop running. I just reminded you of who you already were." And as the sun rose over the Oklahoma plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, two men stood together on the threshold of something that might be victory or might be defeat, but was definitely, absolutely, real. The hearing room was packed, tribal elders in traditional dress, families with children who should have been in school, reporters from every major newspaper in the state, and on the other side, men in suits with briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus stood at the plaintiff's table, and for the first time in his professional life, he wasn't wearing armor. He was wearing his truth. He'd left his expensive suits in Boston. Today he wore jeans, boots, and a ribbon shirt his grandmother had made for him 20 years ago, embroidered with symbols of his clan. When he'd pulled it from the closet that morning, Kai had helped him put it on, fingers careful with the buttons, and had whispered, "She would be proud. Not of the lawyer you became, but of the man you're choosing to be." The corporation's lead attorney was Harold Blackwell, a man Marcus knew by reputation. He'd crushed native land claims in 4 states, had a perfect record, and looked at Marcus with the kind of dismissive condescension that Marcus himself had once directed at less prestigious lawyers. "Your Honor," Blackwell began, his voice smooth and confident. "This case is simple. Titan Energy has followed every legal requirement, obtained every necessary permit, and offered fair market value for land purchases. The plaintiff's objections are based on sentiment, not law. We cannot allow feelings to override property rights and economic progress." He presented his case efficiently: precedents, permits, economic impact studies showing jobs and tax revenue. It was textbook perfect, and if Marcus had been watching from the outside, he would have called it unbeatable. But he wasn't outside anymore. He was inside his community, inside his own skin, inside a truth that couldn't be measured by precedent or profit. Your Honor, Marcus began, and his voice was steady, carrying the weight of generations. This case isn't about property rights or economic development. It's about whether we, as a society, still believe that some things are sacred. That some places hold memories older than our laws, more important than our profits. He presented evidence, not just legal precedents and environmental impact studies, though he had those. But he also presented stories. Videos of elders speaking about the springs, their voices trembling with age and emotion as they described ceremonies that had survived genocide, forced relocation, and systematic erasure. Children learning traditional dances at the springs, their laughter mixing with the sound of water that had flowed for thousands of years. Families gathering for healing ceremonies, cancer survivors describing how the spring water had given them hope during their darkest hours. Kai had gathered them all, had woven together a tapestry of living culture that made the abstract concrete. Marcus presented environmental studies showing that the drilling would contaminate not just the springs but the entire aquifer, affecting water quality for hundreds of miles. He brought in hydrogeologists who testified that once contaminated, the springs could never be restored. Then he addressed the permits that Titan Energy claimed were properly obtained. With the help of a forensic accountant who'd volunteered her time, Marcus showed how the corporation had exploited loopholes, bribed local officials, and deliberately hidden environmental risks from review boards. 3 officials had already resigned in the scandal, and criminal investigations were pending. But most importantly, Marcus did something no Harvard professor had ever taught him. He spoke from his heart. "I'm an Omega," he said, and the courtroom went silent. Even Blackwell looked surprised, his confident smirk faltering. "I left this community 15 years ago because I believed the lies, that being who I am made me less. I built a successful career, won important cases, made a lot of money. And I was completely empty." His voice broke, then strengthened. "My grandmother used to say that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. The man who taught me to remember that is sitting in this courtroom. He's the last of his family line, and he could spend his life bitter and broken. Instead, he spends it taking care of everyone else, fighting for a future he might not even see." Marcus locked eyes with Kai, seeing the tears streaming down his face, seeing the pride and love that made every risk worth taking. "He taught me that the strongest thing we can do isn't to harden ourselves against the world, it's to stay soft enough to be changed by it, brave enough to fight for it, and wise enough to know that we're all connected. When we destroy the sacred, we don't just lose a place, we lose a part of ourselves. We lose the memory of who we were and the possibility of who we might become." He turned back to the judge. "Titan Energy claims this is about progress and jobs. But what kind of progress destroys the irreplaceable? What kind of jobs are worth the extinction of culture? They say we can't let feelings override economic reality, but I say we can't let economics override our humanity. Because once we start believing that everything has a price, that nothing is sacred, that profit matters more than people, we've already lost everything worth having." Marcus presented his final piece of evidence, a petition signed by over 10,000 people, including prominent religious leaders, environmental activists, and even former Titan Energy employees who'd quit in protest. The case had become national news, and public opinion was overwhelmingly on their side. "This isn't just about one family's land or one tribe's sacred site," Marcus concluded. "It's about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be the nation that protects the sacred or the one that auctions it to the highest bidder? The choice, Your Honor, is ours to make." The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge had to gavel for order. Blackwell stood to give his rebuttal, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The perfect, unbeatable case suddenly had cracks. The judge took only 45 minutes to deliberate, and when he returned, his face was grave but resolute. "I've practiced law for 30 years, he said, and I've seen many cases that pitted economic interests against cultural preservation. Usually, economics wins. But this case has reminded me that law isn't just about precedent and property, it's about justice. And there is no justice in destroying what cannot be replaced for profit that will benefit few and harm many. He ruled in favor of the Johnson family, blocking the drilling permanently and ordering an investigation into Titan Energy's permit process. More than that, he designated the springs and surrounding area as a protected cultural site, ensuring it could never be developed. Outside, the celebration was already starting. Drums and laughter, tears and embraces. News cameras captured images that would be shared around the world, native people dancing in victory, holding signs that read, "Water is life," and "The sacred cannot be bought." Kai found Marcus in the crowd, and without words, they came together, not as lawyer and client, not as Alpha and Omega, but as two people who'd found in each other the courage to be completely, authentically themselves. "Forever?" Kai asked, smiling through happy tears. "Forever," Marcus promised. "Not yours, not mine, ours." 3 months later, Marcus had officially resigned from his Boston firm and opened a practice on the reservation, focusing on native rights and environmental justice. His grandmother's house, instead of being sold, became their home, his and Kai's. They'd planted a garden together, adopting the stray dogs that seemed to find their way to people with open hearts. Kai had finally quit 2 of his 3 jobs, keeping only his position as cultural teacher because he loved it. With Marcus's financial support and emotional partnership, he'd started a language revitalization program, teaching the Red Eagle dialect to anyone who wanted to learn. He wasn't the last anymore, he was the beginning of something new. And Marcus had discovered something his years in Boston had never taught him, that success wasn't measured in billable hours or partnership titles, but in the quality of the life you built and the people you built it with. He'd stopped taking suppressants, stopped hiding his designation, and discovered that being openly Omega didn't make him weak, it made him powerful in ways he'd never imagined. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch where Marcus's grandmother had once taught him to read the stars, and Kai would share the stories of his ancestors while Marcus planned legal strategies to protect other sacred sites. They'd become partners in every sense, in love, in purpose, in the daily work of building a life that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Kai asked one night. "Giving up the money, the prestige, the life you'd built?" Marcus pulled him closer, breathing in sage and home and forever. "I gave up a life I was surviving. I found one worth living." And on the Oklahoma plains, where dust devils spin prayers into the sky and sacred springs flow with waters that remember everything, 2 men built a home from hope and courage and the kind of love that transforms not just individuals but entire communities. They proved that the impossible was just something waiting for people brave enough to try, that softness was its own kind of strength, and that forever wasn't just a promise,